Again, you knew where I was today, actually. So I was over in Kewanee, Wisconsin today. So that's not a short trip.
I know. Well, I was wondering about when you were going, Chris. Glad you made it over there. Hope it was productive.
Yes, it was productive. I met with all the village official or city officials there. So that was good. Anyway, total sidebar with Mike. Sorry, everybody. So let's get started with our meeting. So I'm going to call Todd. Are you ready to go with starting the meeting?
Yep, it's
Okay,
recording.
I should have asked that. So I will call our meeting. Wait a second. Before I call the meeting, or Mike, you must have somebody joining you.
I
I
do.
have two Mike Harrigans on the screen right now. Okay.
Well, that's my brother, Mike.
Okay.
There's
Your
Mike
brother,
and
Mike. Mike and Mike. All right. I think
That's
that's a
actually
radio
my
show.
partner, Steve Affelbacher, who's joining me. Yes, he's
Okay.
He's
Awesome. All right. So Todd, let's call the meeting to order and roll call, please.
David Kennedy,
Here.
Chris Zellner,
Here.
Jeff Tews. You're on mute, but I do recognize that you're here, and thanks for making it from afar.
Yeah, I am in Boise, but I am going to drop to go to Lisa's meeting on the learning experiment at 7.
Yeah, we do have a hard break at 7. I'm at that meeting as well.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Kristen Runge,
Here.
Al Dassow,
Here.
Jeff Smith is absent, and Gary Herzberg is absent. I did send Gary a note, Chris.
Okay.
So,
Perfect. Sounds good. Well, then let's get started right away. We have a public comments. Is there anybody here for public comments tonight? I don't see any attendees outside of us. So
one thing I'll share, Chris, is that the CDA starting in June is going to be staffed by a new staff member. Actually, I should check that. What's the date? We may not be starting yet, actually. No, the 15th. Yeah, the 15th is our next meeting. On the 21st, our new community development director is going to be starting. His name is Tim Semin. Tim is the planning director currently for the city of Sun Prairie. Well-established career there, and brings a really good base of knowledge in planning and development to our community. So he's going to be he'll be taking over in my role as the executive director to the CDA, and he'll be your key staff. But I'm sure I'll be around here and there to help out as needed.
okay. Thanks for that public comment, Todd. I would also say Gary Hertzberg is coming on as our village trustee. Gary's been out of office this week. He missed our other meeting as well. So I think he might be on vacation, but I'm not positive on that. But then Kristen Runge is also remaining on our committee. And I say thanks to Ann Lewandowski, who served, and Kristen has moved into her spot on our committee. So thank you for continuing, Kristen, within that. So that is our public comment section. I guess I missed minutes too. So we need to approve our minutes from March 16th. So I'd look for an approval or a motion from somebody for that.
Move to approve.
Motion by Kristen Runge,
Second.
second by Al Dassow. Any other comments? Raise your hand. Okay, seeing none. Todd, can you take the vote, please?
Al Dassow,
Yes.
Kristen Runge,
Yes.
Jeff Tews,
Yes.
Chris Zellner,
Yes.
David Kennedy.
Yes.
Motion carried.
All right, so then our next item is a presentation and discussion regarding programs and policies for use of affordable housing funds. Todd, do you want to start?
Yeah, couple things. So over the next several meetings, what the CDA can expect is that I and then Tim will bring to you content. We're looking to provide you with information, background, projects, and programs that are around the state that may be the sort of program development that you might want to establish for our newly created Affordable Housing Tax Fund. And for Mike and Steve, the village, for the first time, handful of months ago now, did approve a resolution to add a year on to one of our TIF districts. We had some money infused as part of that. Some of that money's been already allocated to a project, a tax LIHTC 9% project that's been approved and hopefully is going to be under construction in July here in Wanakee. But there are some remaining funds, and we have the potential for future TIF extensions for this purpose as well. The village board asked the CDA members to work to establish policies, programs, and guidelines for use of those funds to guide our decision-making in the future. This project that received money was kind of a one-off. We didn't have programs in place. Prior to that, I see Jason. I'm going to bring Jason in. So our task, the village board is assigning the CDA the task of putting together some recommended programs. So what I'd like to do over the next several months is provide to the CDA some information today, starting with Mike Harrigan and Steve Apfelbacher to fill you in on some things that they're working on. I know Fitchburg is a community they're working with, and they've got some programs. But before I switch to them, let me show you, I would like to show you some additional information that I'm going to be making available on a Google Drive. So this is I got some information from the planning director in, I'm blanking on the city, but they went through the similar process and did all this research. But this is an array of policies throughout the state, and I have a few other documents that I'm going to upload and add to this sort of content that we're going to build into a Google Drive. So as you start to get information, we're going to include that so you can then dive back into it and pull it back out as necessary when we finally get to the point of, being comfortable with policy recommendations. So I just want to let you know that that's going to be made available to you in the coming months too. But with that, any questions about the task that the village board has assigned to you?
Hey, Todd, you used the term Affordable Housing Task Force. Is that us? Or is there another task force that's out there?
No, I must have misspoke. I referenced our Affordable Housing TIF fund. I must have misspoke. I was referencing the fund that was created by virtue of the TIF extension.
Okay, and the follow-up question I have is, and I think I know the answer, but approximately how much money is allocated to this group for under the programs and policies that we're coming up with?
Well, I'll just use round numbers because I don't have the
That's
exact
fine.
ones in front of me, but we received a little over 400,000 from the one-year extension, and the board used, I believe, about 75% of that. Is that right, Chris?
Yes.
75 or 80% of that. So fair to say that you have $100,000 in balance. I will note that I'm doing some research currently because the American Recovery Act allows expenditures for affordable housing purposes. And depending on what other priorities might exist for the way in which the village might use those funds, and the village board hasn't discussed that yet. In fact, just today, we received the actual allocation calculations for communities under 50,000 in population, but we'll be receiving over $1 million in that. One thing I'm considering, it might be worth the board considering, is essentially allocating a portion of those funds towards the Cohen-Ezra project in lieu of the money that we allocated from the TIF fund, essentially returning the TIF allocation back to the Affordable Housing Fund. You can't just take the money from the American Recovery Act, as far as I know, and just throw it into the fund for some future use necessarily. It needs to be used on a project that we can quantify and report on. So that's why we might want to think about, the board might want to think about doing a swap. to then infuse some more cash into what you're able to use. But at this point, Al, answer to your question is you've got it in the round number, about $100,000. Long answer to short question, right?
Yeah, and that's something I think, Al, as we're going through here, we'll be contemplating with our next TIF closures. And I believe one of them is a larger TIF that we're going to have with considerably more funds that we could put into a fund for this. That's the goal right now, is to find a way for us to have a policy to, as we look at all these different things, what's makes sense, what doesn't make sense, how we're going to go about using those funds, how much should we be giving of the funds. So that's the task at hand for us right now.
Yeah, and Chris is right. I think in the next 5 years, if I recall, assuming every TIF that could have a year extension is extended for this purpose, if I'm remembering correctly, the CDA could see about $1 million brought into the Affordable Housing Fund.
Okay, any other questions or comments
I
before we go ahead?
Yeah,
Jeff?
I think one of the questions that, because I'm a rookie here, when you look at the size of the problem, it'll be helpful to get your views of what other communities are doing and ask them that question about, okay, how much did that cost? So I can see 100,000 doesn't sound like it goes very far. $1 million, I don't know how far it goes and what sort of impact the village can have utilizing that money. So I know that's something we'll get to as we start exploring what other communities are doing and start to find people within those projects that we can ask the questions about, what does it take?
Yeah, the reality though, Jeff, is that this is rather new. It's been on the books for a little bit, but communities starting to use it in earnest is relatively new. My counterpart in Shorewood, for example, I think it's Shorewood, maybe Whitefish Bay, I don't remember. But yeah, Shorewood, they just got a $1.2 million, I think, from a housing extension. And they don't know what they're gonna do with it. And they don't have any policies to guide them. So when I called her, this is Rebecca Ewald. She said, "Oh, Todd, I'm glad we're talking. Can you tell me about your policies for using these funds?" I'm like, I was hoping you'd tell me about your policies. So there is a lot of groundbreaking work in this area. But yes, Jeff, as we discover more information about this, that'll help inform the CDA. So we'll certainly bring that to you.
And I think that our guest speakers tonight are going to help us probably to understand other things that might be available that we can use with this, or how we can more effectively use the funds that we're going to have in our possession here. So that's probably a good segue in, unless somebody else has any questions. Okay. Todd,
Good. Well, Mike, why don't you introduce your team, Mike? You're very familiar to most of us, I believe already. But and then maybe take the next half hour to present, and we'll have about 15 minutes left for Q&A.
That sounds fine. Thank you very much, Todd. And thank you, Chris and CDA members, for giving me and Steve, my partner, a chance to share with you a little bit of the work we've been doing and some of the thinking we've been doing in this area. Let me introduce Steve Affelbacher, who is the other Mike Harrigan named on the screen over here. And Steve and I have known each other for pretty close to 30 years. And Steve and I both worked for Ellers, the financial advisory company. And I served as chairman for the last 13 years and was a financial advisor to many communities, including Wanakee. I had the good fortune of serving. And Steve Affelbacher was the president of our company, and he had been with the company, Steve, I don't know, what was it, 30 years? Steve, you're muted.
40 years, Mike.
Oh, God. Anyway, it was a long time, and we both retired. I in 2019, the fall of 2019, Steve in 20. But just prior to retirement and during that period of time, because of the kind of work that I was doing with communities like yours and others, I recognized that there was a tremendous need in the area of workforce housing. And this is, of course, pre-pandemic yet. And we were thinking that, with the tools that we're familiar with, there's got to be a way for communities to be able to get into, if they want to be active in this area, to do so in a way that is not just a one and done sort of investment, but gives them an opportunity to take whatever funds they have available and effectively recycle them, and to create, the concept was to create a program that would be sustainable over a period of time and allow the community to do it in a way that minimized the risk and really resulted in something meaningful. So we really didn't know for sure exactly how that was going to look. So we spent a good deal of the first year, we really spent researching and talking to a lot of people. We spent some of our own, good deal of, well, all of our own funds to legally vet what we're going to talk to you about tonight. And I think we're pretty excited about the opportunity, because it's not meant as a program that's going to solve everybody's problems and cover all the bases for affordable housing, or what we now are referring to in a more specific niche of that area, workforce housing. Our program that we're going to talk to you tonight about is something that focuses on home ownership. And it provides a transition for an individual to go from renting to owning, and to capture the equity growth that would occur in a property to enable them to ultimately obtain conventional financing and move on with the property.
Like
So,
one quick jump in, if I could. I would just note that one reason when I learned about Mike's program, I knew it would be applicable here, and Kristen can probably attest to this, having crafted our housing task force report, that home ownership and initiatives towards supporting and encouraging home ownership was called out as very clear priority in that report, in a couple of segments, actually. So that's why I knew this was going to be good relevant information for us.
good. Well, okay. So hopefully there'll be something here that you can take from it, and it's great that you're doing your own research, and we'll have exposure to a lot of ideas. And if it turns out that this is something that would work, or you'd want to pursue further, we'd be happy to talk more. But I'm not gonna, because we've got a limited amount of time, I'm not gonna belabor any of this. I think we want to move right to the presentation and give you plenty of time to ask any questions. And with that, I'm going to share I'm going to put up the slides on my screen and share it. And then Steve will begin our presentation. We're going to kind of tag team through this thing. And
I do have the slide deck, and I will upload that to the Google Drive that you'll all have access to.
Oh, okay. So I don't have to share my screen, Todd?
No, go ahead, Mike, do that. I'm just letting the CDA members know that they'll be able to view your presentation again in the Google Drive.
Okay.
Well, Mike, while you're calling it up there, let me just introduce myself just a little bit more. I started tax increment work in Wisconsin in 1979, before the law was declared legal. And so I've got a long history of really when the law started and working in the tax increment area. My primary area was Western Wisconsin, and came out of that side of the state to handle a number of Wisconsin clients. And in fact, Mike and I worked jointly in Waunakee for about 5 years in terms of being the municipal advisors, for the city. So understand the community, understand tax increment financing in Wisconsin. And as Mike and I talked about, what we wanted to do as we retired from Ellers, it became clear to us that when we started to talk about economic development, it was really, let's get that industry into town and get them going. And soon, as time has gone on, we've discovered that the industries are successful, but they can't find employees. And in fact, employees are really driving long distances. And while the industry may be paying what might be a competitive wage, there really was an affordability gap there that needed to be addressed. And we wanted to find a way that would make sure that we could attract, using this as an economic development tool, employees within the community and really hit a niche in the market. And we'll talk more about that in terms of this program. I think we see a lot of programs out there for 60% of it, medium income, in that area, but there isn't really anything in what we have defined as affordable housing, which is workforce housing, as we've talked about before, which is in really that 80 to 100% of adjusted gross income. And that's really, if you were to say, how does this program works best? It probably works best for those types of individuals within this. So Mike, you want to go to the next slide, please? So, as you know, what really has happened is that there's an imbalance in regards to having enough income to pay for housing. And typically individuals will pay about 30% of their adjusted gross income for housing, 30 to 35%. And when you look at the wages that are being paid within those industries, there's that gap which results in renting. And there isn't the ability for them to establish equity in the home, nor be able to be in a position to in the foreseeable future, see that they have an opportunity to buy a home that they could settle down and call their own. So Mike, you want to move on to the next one, please? So what we've done is we've developed what we call the Workforce Housing Endowment Fund. And as Mike has indicated, looking at the revolving loan program that may be available for industries, let's loan them the money, get it paid back. We view this as kind of the same approach. Let's create a program where we can establish and create a residential development that ultimately will be rented and in turn then will be sold. And those proceeds come back to the fund to create another project and another opportunity. And hopefully those proceeds come back with some sort of additional equity that's returned on that. We think then as we've looked at this program, that the program can be tailored to the specific needs within the community. There's a lot of ability to tailor this to the income area that you want or the type of project that you want. Is it townhomes? Is it rehabbing single family? Is it new single family? We think that there's a lot of flexibility in all of those areas. We also know that for this to work, it would be important to try to partner with other development or other key members within the community, such as employers, private foundation, or community foundations that may have a vested interest in seeing that a project or development like this is created. And as we've talked about, we've created this as on a sustainable basis, so it's not one and done, but really is an opportunity to rent to own. And in the projections that we've done initially, that time period may be somewhere between 4 and 8 years that they would be renting for 4 years and then have the opportunity to buy the unit and own the unit and in fact then own the home and pay back then the CDA for the upfront costs that they had in this project. And as we've talked about, it's really been, Mike and I have done a lot of work in development agreements. And what we've tried to do is tailor this program to really limit the exposure to the taxpayers with certain elements that we're trying to build into the program. So with that, Mike, let me turn it over to you.
So we'll get into more meat here, but from a broad perspective, here are some of the key elements or fundamentals of this concept. First thing that's really important to seek out and to identify to make a program like this successful is finding a motivated individual or individuals to be partners with and to be part of the project. So we want an individual that's got an interest and a commitment. This concept that we've put forth suggests, and these are numbers that can be flexible, but we believe that there should be skin in the game for someone To start, the equity question is always a problem for people, but we would expect a minimum of $5,000 as an upfront ante. Communities can tailor that as they wish. We believe that in communities that are serious about it, the Community Development Authority, using some of the tools that it has available to it, or the employer foundation could provide the balance of the equity, possibly using that tax increment money that you are setting aside and that could be available. But the key here is to provide enough so that the downstroke, the equity that's provided, will enable a mortgage and other costs associated with home ownership to not exceed 30 to 35% of that tenant's income. Again, the sources of the CDA capital could be the one-year TIF extension. In some cases, surplus TIF revenues in certain types of qualifying districts, if you have an existing district that's created in the right way. Employer capital and other municipal cash. And an example of that is Todd's mentioning of the recent dollars that are being made available by the federal government and others. In Minnesota, we've had conversations with communities that are actually budgeting money for this type of a purpose and doing it on an annual basis. To give you an idea on just general sources and uses of funds, typically, depending upon the community, it could provide cash. If the cash isn't available, a taxable bank loan or a taxable bond can be used. The balance being filled out by TIF capital, other community partners, TIF surplus, and the tenant. From the standpoint of the monies that would be spent, largest portion, of course, is on construction and site acquisition, with the balance being involved in reserve funds, fees. The fees include a management fee because we don't expect the community is going to have its staff that's going to be available to do this on its own. It's probably going to want to engage a professional management company to assist in screening and selecting and managing the property ultimately. Steve, you want to take the next couple of slides?
Sure, Mike. As you can see there, when we talk about projects, it's really the flexibility and of the program to be able to have the CDA establish what is it? Is it new construction? Is it rehab construction? But ultimately, whatever the project is owned by the CDA until it's sold to the participants. And so the CDA is responsible for the project development, which means establishing the site, the type of project that it's involved with, the construction of that project, and in turn, the management of that project. And as Mike has indicated, we believe a professional management company is probably the best way to help educate, screen, and collect rents and manage units for something like this, because typically CDA does not have staff, nor do they want to have staff to be able to do all of those activities that are really part of a successful project. In addition to that, the tenant will pay a monthly rent that's sufficient to pay the financing that's outside. So the size of the financing is dictated on what can be supported by the rents. As in the slide that Mike talked about, you saw that we've included a debt reserve in the event there's some tenant that can't make a payment. We've got a provision there for a pot of money to help that until that can be resolved. We've also included then a pilot payment. Instead of paying all of the property taxes, the pilot payment would be a payment made to the municipality, or in other words, to Waunakee, based on what the valuation would be and the mill rate for that particular year. And that's been built into the project, that's an annual payment that the project would make. Based on the model that we've created, we've targeted then that 4 to 8 year period where the project would be sufficient so that there would be equity enough for the tenant to be able to leverage commercial financing, which means that they would have 20% equity and in turn then be responsible and have sufficient income to handle the other 80% of the mortgage that would be on whatever the current value of the property would be. At that point, then the original equity would come back to the CDA with a portion for appreciation or some sort of interest component based on how the numbers work out in the final setup and success of the program. Mike, would you go to the next slide, please? So in terms of timeframes, we wanted to give you some sense of what does it mean. And so from the startup standpoint, we're talking about, we see the first step being a housing study, which would really be to develop the profile of the development and to develop a model that's tailored specifically to Waunakee in terms of costs, numbers that are current within the market, and really a feasibility report to say, does this idea make any sense at all? Once that's prepared, then there'd be the execution phase, which would be as you begin to acquire the site, build the site, screen the tenants, and in turn then have the building up and running, which would be the startup. The equity growth period then is the renting period, which could be that 48-year period where the tenant makes their payments, the management company manages the units, and in turn, the final step then is closing on the sale, which is refinanced to the tenant. And that's all within that 48-year period as we projected that, where the tenant then in turn would take their equity, secure private equity financing, and pay off the CDA then for the remaining balance that's due. Mike, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, so let's talk about some specific details and metrics of what we've looked at. This is information that is pertinent to Dane County. And we had done this as part of some of the work we were doing with Fitchburg earlier this year and late last year. So it probably still could be updated further because we got, as you all know, a lot of moving targets with costs and other numbers that become involved here. But I think this is good enough for this particular evening because it gives you at least a pretty good idea of what the metrics are that we've been looking at to go into this kind of thinking. So we start out with taking a look at what is the level of income that we're really targeting here. We start out with the initial metrics, assuming that we're targeting that 80% of median family income. And we've got about an average of 3.5 persons, because we say average because what we are coming down to here is we've modeled, at least for this discussion, a townhouse style of product with 10 units in the townhouse. And not everybody's going to have the same number of people in each one. So we're targeting it at 3.5. The income for that range is about 75,000 and 360 at 80%. So at 30% of that number, that means that the maximum that we want to have that individual have to lay out for housing is $22,608 a year. So that's when we talk about that number, that includes any principal and interest or rent. It includes any taxes that they would pay, insurance, and utilities are included in that number. As I said, we looked at the concept and had costed out doing this for a 10-unit townhouse type product, approximately 1,200, 1,300 square feet, and the cost of about $226,800 per unit. We expect the tenant to put down $5,000, and we've calculated that the gap to be bridged that the community would have to come up with is $17,000 in order to yield a net mortgage of $204,800 for that unit. And we assume a 2.9% mortgage rate on that, which, again, hopefully is certainly conservative right now, but it's a moving target. So that was at the beginning. What we're also looking at then is ultimately being able to turn this in from a rental property into a homeowner property by that same tenant. So we have to look at some of the metrics at the back end of that process. And we're assuming for purposes of this model, a 4% cost of a mortgage in 4 years. We're assuming a rate of appreciation of the property of 1% a year. We're assuming annual wage and cost inflation of 2%. And so after 4 years of appreciation, we're assuming that same property is going to be worth $238,369. So at the refinance, and that would be the refinance point. At that refinance point, we would expect the CDA to get repaid its initial investment of $17,000. The balance that would be due on the original loan that would be set up, that would be in process to be paid off is $183,798, and that leaves a little bit of residual equity for distribution back both to the CDA and to apply 20% to the tenant. So we have a residual equity along with accumulated cash flow surplus from the monthly payments that are being made. Enough to be able to project that ultimately, not only would there be a 20% down payment available to the tenant, but also an additional $10,000 back to the CDA for further program growth going forward. So let's break it down on a monthly basis from where we start to where we end up with in year 4. So that annual income breaks down for the tenant to $6,280 a month. 30% for housing is $1,884. After 4 years, that's growing at that 2% rate that we talked about. We have a fee that we're going to be charging during the period of the rental, along with a payment in lieu of taxes, a management fee, utilities, and insurance. And that's $669 per month. And that leaves a net available from the 30% figure of $1,215 for the mortgage. The actual mortgage payment is $860, and then that leaves a balance of $356 for mortgage reduction. That shrinks a little bit over 4 years, but you can see that that would be the plan. And again, after the 4th year, when the property converts from CDA ownership to the tenant's ownership, that property becomes taxed at that point, and they pay full property taxes at that juncture. During the period of the CDA's ownership, the reason for the pilot, the payment in lieu of taxes, PILOT, payment in lieu of taxes, is so that the municipality at least collects its tax during that period and is able to cover the costs of services for the local municipality. So what are the benefits to both the village and to the homeowner? Well, at the end of the day, this results in a property, taxable property value on the tax roll, not exempt, but on the tax roll after the takeout of all the units of $2,383,000. You get your initial downstroke down. You're putting out $170,000 overall for the 10 units, but you're getting that back, and there's an additional residual payment of $102,000 on top of that, based on the current numbers. Now that's sort of a shock absorber because that can come and go, depending upon what happens with some of the metrics in this model. The tenant, the homeowner, gets a property worth $238,000 at the end of the day, with equity at $47,674, and they end up paying 30% of their income for rent and for their mortgage and payments going forward into the future. Steve? Steve Affelbacher, are you there?
Yes, I am. I've unmuted myself. So we wanted to give you a sense in terms of what the final project may look like. You'll see then what's been identified is in the model that we put together based on the assumptions, it was a 4-year takeout. You'll see the community cash was needed was the 170. The tenant cash was 50, and the CDA debt, the 2,115,000 was the loan then, either through a bank loan or debt issued by the CDA that was necessary to finance that until the takeout occurred. So
Steve, are you muted again?
Looks like you might have froze, Mike.
Okay, well, let me just continue. I mean, this slide just identifies the elements here of capital that are going to be required in order to make this a reality. Tenant cash, we need $50,000 from the 10 tenants. We need $170,000 from the downstroke from the municipality, and then we either need the CDA or a lender to provide capital financing of the 2,115,000, which is really for a 4-year period, and then that gets taken out by conventional financing is the game plan. Now we assumed again the idea that we can also do single family rehabilitation, we can do single family construction, and we could do larger than 10 unit, but in doing different modelings of concepts, we really think that the townhouse product is the one that lends itself most effectively to this type of a thing. We also think that the type of product that makes the most sense is, again, one in that roughly 1,200 to 1,300 square foot range. We do think that it's pretty important there be a 2-car garage associated with the project, with each unit. And beyond that, you can, your own design standards will come into play, but recognizing that it's going to impact cost and might involve a little more subsidy or less, depending on what you choose. Steve Affelbacher, jump in if you could get back, but otherwise I'll just keep going here. So at the end of the day, and this is our last slide, but let's just indicate that we really do think that this is a program that has a lot of really great potential for the right community. We think especially it would be effective if there's a community that has partners in an employer or employers that could particularly benefit from the community's involvement here. And we also think that it's key that as part of the process that the CDA and obviously the village partner with the right partners. That means the proper development builder and the proper management company, because they're the ones that will be helping with the screening and the education process, and they will also be the ones that will be doing the work of creating a product that is really and truly reflective of the values of the community. And so having local people that are used to the expectations of the local municipalities, elected and appointed bodies, is really, I think, a key to any community's success with this type of program. So with that, I think we're getting close to our deadline in time, and I will stop talking and open it up for anybody that's got a question that they might want to ask either of us.
I'll just go around the group then and see what questions you might have. I'm just randomly picking, Kristen, you're in the bottom left, so I'm going to start with you. And then just count
Yeah.
down.
I think this is really interesting and accomplishes a lot of the goals of affordable homeownership as something that the task force, when they were underway, wanted. Question, what happens if somebody is in year 3 and gets a job transfer or decides homeownership is not for them? And can they continue renting but not owning, or could they, if they leave altogether, do they just I'm imagining they forfeit the equity that they have, but there's got to be some incentive to follow through on this. Do they get their 5,000 back?
No,
So you have to be, yeah, which, the risk you take, right? Is a,
yeah, that's part of the deal. I mean, we're not going to, I mean, that's the meaning of a down payment. And we think people need to have something at risk here in order to make sure that they understand the consequences of making the choice to leave. And, if they do, then, this is a matter of policy now. It comes back to the community in terms of the design of your own program. But it's certainly possible for you to allow someone to step into that mortgage and to pick up where they left off on that, or to have them start over. But that's the kind of thing that I think you got some flexibility with. I think ultimately it's from the village's perspective, you probably would prefer, I would think you'd probably prefer to want to turn that over to private ownership as quickly as possible, generally across the board. And whatever process that would allow for that would be the approach that you might want to consider taking.
and second question, when they go to sell the townhouse after they've been in it for 10 years, they're ready to move up or need to move up, then does it come back to the CDA and go through the process again, or it's just on the market, I'm going to imagine?
Again, that's a good question. Those are questions that probably will differ community to community. Some communities have talked about restricting the sale of these units to individuals that would strictly would have to qualify as being in that workforce 80 to 100% income level. But that also limits your market in terms of growth in valuation if you're going to do that as well. So those are the kinds of questions that will differ from community to community.
I think it's really interesting. I'm going to be mulling this over in my mind tonight. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, well, it's one of these we spent quite a bit of time really talking. I mean, our last, we put names. I guess I'm sorry, I didn't put that last one up on the board. But Todd, I assume you'll have this available for people. Is that true? Okay. So, I mean, we've talked to an awful lot of people, both in Wisconsin and Minnesota, that are recognized experts in this arena, just to pick their brains before we did anything on this. And then we played with a lot of different models, and we learned a lot in that process. So I think we feel pretty good about the program. It's not for every community, probably, for sure, but it's certainly something that I think is very, very implementable. And it's something that you can continue to do if it's successful in your community again and again, which was our objective.
All right, thanks, Kristen. Al?
So I've known Mike for about 30 years since I've been serving on various committees of the Village of Wanakee. You may not know me, Mike, but I've seen your face many,
I
many
remember
times.
you, Al. For sure.
So we have a long informal history, and I've seen a lot of your presentations historically. I already had this penciled out last time we met when Todd has presented us with a number of opportunities and options, and I already figured this out, but I guess I didn't say it at the last meeting, but this is kind of where I was headed. There's a couple of differences I would have had. One would be, what about a nonprofit versus the CDA for many reasons? And then the other would be the employer perhaps being the lender of money, and there would be some conditions on employment, and you got to be careful with nonprofit. That's kind of the different twists and angles I put into it. I'm supportive of the idea. There's a lot of details, obviously. I just don't know how it gets done in this context, other than I saw the last bullet point on your slide that says we hire HNA advisors to do the feasibility study, and I assume get us off the ground. I suppose that's one way to go. I guess the key from our committee standpoint is, is that what we want to do? We've heard many, many programs. Todd has brought a lot of information to us at this point in time of other options that are out there, depending how deep we want to go into workforce or affordable housing. I saw this last time we met with all the options out there, putting a bunch of them together, and this is what I had come up with, the same identical plan, like I said, a couple deviations from. So I like the idea. I just don't know how it's sold and put together yet.
Okay, thank you, Al. David?
I really like the concept, but I have the question about how did you determine your household income number that you're using? Have you looked at this and said below that household number it doesn't work very well, or it certainly requires a lot more outside money than the person involved putting up? Because I looked at it and said, $75,000 a year is two people in a household working 40 hours a week, making $18 an hour each, or some kind of combination thereof that comes up to that number. And I'm a little concerned that maybe that's heading for a group, making more money than we've been thinking about. I may be wrong. So I just think that's a question I would have for you, how you arrived at that $75,000 household number.
Well, that's a great question. Let me answer that in a couple of ways. One is that we actually didn't limit ourselves to looking at just that. We ran the numbers at 60% and we ran the numbers at 40%. We can't make it work at 40 at all. Those numbers just don't work, period. And so that's not going to happen. At 60%, that of course requires a much larger subsidy on the front end by the CDA or the municipality in order to bridge the gap that you've got in terms of that 30%, making sure that the individual is only going to pay the 30% for housing costs. So it can be made to work, but it's going to be, it'll involve a lot more upfront from the municipality. Now, having said that, this thing can be further customized so that you maybe in a 10-unit project, maybe you set aside 2 units. You're going to target at something lower than the 80% income level, if that's your objective. The other part of the answer to that question is that when we started doing our research and after talking to and looking at a lot of different programs that are out there, and you're already doing this with one of the things that Todd Schmidt mentioned, is you've got you're participating in a low-income housing tax credit project, right? That's a 60%er typically. That's the one that's going to target the 60% level. So there's programs that are out there. My point being is that there's programs that are out there already fact, the majority of the programs that are out there are actually programs that are serving the 40 to 60% range. Not so many that are out there that are serving the 80% range. And the other thing we wanted to do is to try to create something that didn't depend on having to get money elsewhere, other than maybe what you already had on hand from your tax increment closeouts, and could leverage on your own. So, for better or worse, that was the framework in which we came up with the numbers. And of course, the numbers themselves come from the HUD, Department of Housing and Urban Development database in terms of that information.
Perfect. Thank you, Mike. Thanks, David. Anything else, David? I don't want to cut you off. Any other questions or thoughts? Nope. Okay. Sounds good. Jeff Tews. Since we have about 4 minutes left.
Yep, I'll be quick. I as an employer, this creates so many questions for me. Would an employer sponsor the entire project, multi-units, get assigned units? And then, as Kristen had asked the question, what about longevity of the employee, or you decide the employee is not performing properly and you decide to fire the person? There's all sorts of questions that I've got about that, but I really like the concept of building equity and building towards ownership. Somewhere down the line, as we're talking about it more, I'd love to talk to employers who have been involved in this.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. And then Jason Valeris, did you have anything to say before I make my comments quick?
Sure. I'll reiterate that I think this is an interesting and attractive model. My quick question, I guess, is to ask how you see this comparing to the what appears to be a fairly similar program from the Urban League of Greater Madison.
Well, I think the one thing I would say, and I don't profess to know what exactly the program is that you're referring to, Jason. But what I will tell you is that this was designed to allow the municipality to have as much flexibility in the program design as possible for its specific situation. I don't know if the Urban League program is one that you have to mold to fit criteria that they set, or whether you got the ability to create your own framework or not. But this program would allow you to do some of that, or maybe give you a little more flexibility. But you asked a question that I should know and give a better answer to, so I should probably do a little research on that and find out a good answer for that question.
Yeah, I think your comments about the income range that you felt was a good place to target, I tend to agree with. I think that's a range that there aren't a lot of other programs that are addressing, and that I think is relevant in Waunakee. And the answer may be that it's going to be really tough for us to get to a home ownership program below 80 or certainly below 60 in Waunakee. But and to kind of answer my own question about the Urban League program, it's geared to those lower incomes. Either they have a 40 to 60 and a 60 to 80 percent, and they seem to focus on rehabbing existing homes, kind of one at a time, and selling them through this rent-to-own program.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. So my comments are very simple. This is an option for us, and we've been talking about a lot of different things and throwing a lot of things up on the wall for us to all look at, consider, contemplate, and this is just another one. Just like we looked at the TIF extensions for using that as a potential. Now, what I hear about this, sustainability of the program is something I think is very important to us, rather than the one and done that Mike referred to right off the bat with this. So I think I'm trying to take it all in, absorb it, Todd, thank you for having all that information that we're going to have access to that we can go back and review. I think it's a great thing for us to bring back and discuss at our next meeting as well, obviously. And maybe we have Mike and Steve join us for that meeting as well, if you guys would be available. But I think it's important for us to all look at this and really study it. The 60 to 80, I was happy to hear you say that 60 was workable, Mike, within this. I want to look at that. You know, I was hearing the different policy things we're going to have to make decisions on. Jeff, you just brought up a couple from the employer's perspective. You know, if somebody's leaving, to Kristen's question, maybe there's a subleaser type program within this that they could get their own person to come in and substitute that person in. I don't know. There's all different things that we're going to have to think about with that. But I think this is another good start for us, another good topic to look at. So that being said, Al's got his hand up. You have a little button you can push to put a hand up too, but since you put your actual hand, we'll use that quick. Go ahead.
Very quick comment, and that is for a $2.4 million project, 10 units doesn't seem like it's going to satisfy a whole lot of workforce housing, just on a global sense. The details that you guys all talked about, that'll all be worked out, but from a global stance, 10 units, I'm not sure how that's going to affect workforce housing.
Yeah, is it scalable, I guess is the question that you're asking, Al,
Yes.
to get to our needs. So that might be a question that we can throw out to Mike and Steve for our next topic or next time we have them. So, all right. Any other things, Todd, that are on there? I know that several of you have to jump into another meeting. So
Just a big thank you to Mike and Steve for joining us tonight, and we'll do some follow-ups.
absolutely. Thank you, guys. And if you have any other questions, direct them to Todd, and maybe Todd can communicate those over to Steve or Mike as necessary. Okay. Awesome. Then
Thank you.
we just have one more motion for this meeting.
Move to adjourn?
Motion
Second.
by Kristen Runge, second by Al Dessau. Through a show of hands, all in favor. All right, we've got our motion and succeeded. So thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your evening and talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody.
So,
Bye now.
And just for purposes of minute taking, motion was at 7:03. Good night, everybody.